Hello and welcome back to the Single Malt Review. Had to do a bit of true detective work, but I found us a truly interstellar bourbon here. It is Wild Turkey's Longbranch. And what is it all about, Dave?
Well, we have here is an 8-year-old Wild Turkey, a little bit different from the other Kentucky Straight bourbons. It has been filtered somewhat with oak and Texas mesquite charcoal to produce, I assume, a slightly more refined, lighter spirit.
Lighter, also, but maybe a little smokier too, is the suggestion.
And with a certain degree of celebrity endorsement, since one of the creative directors of this company is in fact Matthew McConaughey.
Yes.
Subtly referenced by Tim there in his opening.
Co-created by Matthew McConaughey. His signature there alongside Mr. Russell himself.
Yeah.
So it's a partial departure from Wild Turkey. The mash bill, if my research is to be trusted, is exactly the same.
75% corn and the rest an almost equal mixture of barley and rye.
Yes, indeed. So it's still very much Wild Turkey. 8 years old, but they've chosen not to disclose that. I suspect that's because they might want to change that number in the future, and it would be a bit of a bother changing the label, especially if the number happens to go down. They'd be up for a consumer savaging if that ever happens. So probably best to keep it, under wraps. You can understand the direction there. But this one, release number 1, is an 8-year-old bourbon.
Yeah.
The other vital statistics here is, at least in the States, if you've got the proper version, it's 43% ABV. What's the proof on that one? Mental calculations. There we go, 86. This one, they've crapped it up just for us, as bourbon companies I want to do. Our one down here, the Oceania release is 40% and a whole 50 mils smaller, but
43 though. Even the American release, that is light.
Yeah, it's pretty light. It's pretty light, and I think that's maybe a window into what this bourbon is for. This is a pretty easygoing, good times noodle salad bourbon. It's not really there to challenge anybody, but we will see. We'll give it the proper benefit of all doubt before we really come down on it. So. On the nose.
That's an impressive nose.
You can smell the charcoal.
Yeah, you can smell maple syrup of all things. My first immediate reaction to that nose was some Canadian maple bacon lollipops I had in the distant past.
Yeah, that sounds horrifying, but
yeah, it was a bit.
I agree on the maple
syrup though is front and centre, despite not playing any role whatsoever, obviously, in the spirit.
Well, because this has undergone some charcoal filtering, I suspect. Before it was cast, not after, or they'd strip some of the colour, but that's going to impart an extra hit of vanillin compounds into the whiskey. So that's almost like an injection of vanilla-y, oaky goodness, before it's hit the cask.
There's a good bit of oak and a fair amount of smoke on that nose.
Very vanilla.
Sweet syrupiness. I'll assume that's something to do with mesquite.
Well, that's come through from that's the sweet wood tannins. Once you burn, when you incompletely burn wood, I won't go into the actual chemical mechanics of charcoal manufacture, but certain things are left, and in addition to a lot of active carbon, which pulls away a lot of the more fusel, higher alcohols that may be in the original spirit. Some things don't go away, and vanillin is one of those compounds, and so that comes back into the whiskey while other things are being pulled away. So we look for a slightly purer but also more vanilla heavy, and the char is really real. You can
the more I nose that, the more just straight up woody, more timbery it gets.
Yeah, this really is kind of like smelling a big bag of hardwood charcoal.
Yeah, to
a significant extent. Other things that are in there, I think it's the filtration has taken away some of the spice you would normally get in Wild Turkey, and
it's
some of the savouriness as
this
well.
Is much more pale than you get, even taking into account the fact that it's a mere 40% ABV, it is much more pale than you expect for an 8-year-old bourbon, so that I would assume it be attributed somewhat to filtration. So it is reminding me of other charcoal filtered bourbons, say Bond and Lillard from the Whiskey Barons collection we tried recently.
Also from Wild Turkey Spirit. It's, in terms of comparing one bourbon to another, it has gone in a slightly more Jim Beam direction. Jim Beam, sort of very sweet, very mellow kind of a bourbon. Wild Turkey, a little bit tauter, a little bit more savoury, a little bit more mid-palate. Typically, this one, yeah, it is leaned a little bit over to the beam end of the spectrum in terms of its super easy drinking, super mellow kind of a thing.
Speaking of easy drinking, I'm going to give that a try. That is so light on the tongue. There's virtually no impression of any alcohol there at all, except for a residual smouldering burn. It only springs up after you swallow.
Yeah, charcoal filtration doesn't mess around. It will affect your bourbon, and it will do it pretty significantly, and it has here.
Oh man, there are some... It's taken away a lot of the heavy-hitting bourbon flavour fastballs you often get. It's left, though, a much more subtle, much more delicate set of flavours. Right on the finish, there's a big sort of swelling flavour of candied citrus. You think like a candied orange peel. That comes through pretty strongly.
Yeah, definitely. It has to be candied, but it's definitely there. The charcoal is still very, very prevalent. And
it's bitter grapefruit springing up too. There's a lot of just a subdued wood smoke throughout.
But it's very sort of clean and mellow is almost not the right word. It's like it's sort of fresh and flowing. It's not nearly as spicy as regular Wild Turkey. The spice is not completely gone, but it's super, super diminished. It's gone from a real, basket of spice to maybe just a cinnamon stick or two, kind of in the background, just sort of sweet spices now.
There's a little hint of some clove and nutmeg, but mainly just a bit of cinnamon, a touch of ginger, just a hint.
The oak tannin is significantly reduced as well. Yeah. It's a bourbon that's, I think, pitching a little lower than regular Wild Turkey. Not that Wild Turkey is a challenging bourbon, but it's a bit of a keener, more happening bourbon than your, most of what, say, Jim Beam or Heaven Hill kicks out. It's a bit more, just a little bit more going on in the palate, especially. 8
years is not an insignificant age statement for bourbon, but normally a bourbon of that age is going to be this rich, syrupy, bombastically explosive flavour sensation, really. So, in a way, I like that this has been through a filtration process. It strips away a lot of that heavier, more punchy stuff, leaving behind some of those, I guess, probably more subtle, mature bourbon characters, things you might miss normally because they're buried under all the layers of bombast.
Giving it a bit of space, the finish is actually the finish is going on. It's got a pretty long tail on it, and it's quite a pleasing one as well. It's quite a buttery, oaky, almost vanilla ice cream kind of a finish to it if you give it the room.
I'm getting the finish I'm getting is reminding me of the smell of a smouldering campfire. Just when there's just some embers, so a little bit of glow left, but just those fumes of wood smoke.
Yeah, that charcoal really defines this bourbon. And in terms of the flavour and also the purity of the spirit, it's a lot lighter bodied. It's almost like, to use a Scotch analogy, this is like a lowland bourbon, almost. We were just trying a lowland blend of malts, and as lowland is to Highland Scotch whisky, this is a little bit the same, as most bourbons are sort of a little more aggressive, a lot spicier, and a bit more savoury. This is very, very pure, very, very mellow, flowing, crisp almost.
Now, if this was a stronger spirit, I'd be tempted to add a little water. I know it's heavily frowned upon, and with such a relatively low strength to begin with, that could be injurious to the experience. So, let's go the other tried and true bourbon route of adding an ice cube.
There we go.
These cubes are sadly too big to fit in wine glasses.
Do it super proper and get a tumbler.
Actually in a tumbler, yep. Because I think this could do impressive things.
That looks a bit sad. I'm going to top mine up a wee bit. Just a wee bit more there. Alright, so one could say maybe its natural element with a bit of big old nice cube there, but a proper spirit cube, no crummy little bits of bar ice.
That's just not going to happen. So that's hence the tumblers.
Oh yeah, that's not bad.
Ooh, wow, that has brought out that maple syrup-like property that I noticed before. It has gone so sweet so quickly.
That was pretty easy drinking before.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's kind of, it almost drinks it for you. That's very, very easy drinking bourbon there. That's like beginner's bourbon here. If you want to get someone into drinking the bourbon neat, that's probably that's the vector right here.
Yeah, serve them one of these with an ice cube, but they will be beguiled and entranced.
They won't even need the Coca-Cola anymore. It's still sippable.
Yeah.
You know, it's no sort of swigging bourbon, but it's very, very, very
It's kind of
gentle.
pruned the hedge a bit and narrowed this down to its just most fundamental elemental characteristics. There's wood smoke and there is sweet syrup, and that's about it. It has just amplified those and made them just the driving force with no guff, no
It's
noise.
funny how it's amplified the charcoal. Because I find ice has the reverse effect for peated whiskey, but of course that's completely different.
Yeah.
Peat is that affects the grain, it affects the absolute heart of the whiskey, whereas charcoal, that sort of secondary kind of influence, and it's weird. The ice, it hasn't necessarily amplified it, but it hasn't quietened that sort of charry, smoky element down at all.
Now I'm thinking for future bourbons, we should probably keep the tumblers and ice cubes on
Yeah,
hand. This
it
is
wouldn't be
definitely
a
the way to
bad
go
idea.
if you want to transform your bourbon.
It's sort of it's the version of bourbon where putting we might add a dash of water to our scotch. This is sort of the bourbon's dash of water right here, I think.
So we have been, I'd say, fairly criticised in the past for adding water to bourbon.
Well,
it does transform it somewhat,
yeah.
but it is not the done thing. So, hey, this seems to be enough way to go about things.
It's like water, only stylish and hard. But hey, whatever. So scores for this one. I don't like this as much as normal wild turkey.
Right.
I think this is, and not to say that it's a bad bourbon. I just think it's a bourbon not aimed necessarily at me because I'm not some sort of super duper bourbon man. But I do drink more bourbons than your average schmuck on the street, right? So I'm looking for a wee bit more than this has got. I certainly see what this is aiming for and absolutely hits it in terms of a super approachable bourbon for practically anybody. I've mentioned children's whiskey in the past, and this is coming close to it. So with that in mind, with that in mind that I'm a hostile witness to this score. I think it's an 84. What do you think?
This is a tasty and interesting twist on mature bourbon. It does something new, it does something a bit different, and it's got a clear goal in mind, which is this accessible, drinkable, sweet yet smoky offering. So I personally prefer a bit more heft in bourbon, whether it's for a higher ABV or just obviously less filtration or none, so it's just that heavy, syrupy wallop whole way through. Nonetheless, this is enjoyable, it's versatile, and so approachable, so it gets an 86.
Yeah. I'm all out of Matthew McConaughey puns, but never mind. Mixability, I wouldn't with this one. I think it's too delicate that if you try it in a cocktail, it's probably not going to hold up. Maybe an old-fashioned if you really hold the syrup and the bitters to a certain extent, maybe, but honestly I'd go for a stouter bourbon for your mixing. Similarly, Coke, if you're one of those, if you're part of the problem, I probably wouldn't do that either.
What would be the point, really? You wouldn't taste
bourbon,
the bourbon.
yeah, it's too easily overpowered. So for almost any mixing vector, I would use a stouter bourbon in this one. This one is it's a sipping bourbon, but it's a real easygoing. It's super laid back. So there you go. Do with that what you will. We will do what we do. With goodness, it's going to be a rum. I'm looking at it across the room. You can't see it, but I can, and it looks delicious.
Yes.
We will be right back. Slanger.
Once I wipe the splashes of bourbon off my glasses,
Oh,
the
no.
ice cube moved. And
All right.